Welcome to the RI Realtors Real Talk Quarterly Forum. So my name is Bev Pierce, and it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists for our Q3 forum. So first we have Monica Staff. I'm sure many of you know Monica Staff, our General Counsel of RI Realtors and Statewide Multiple Listing Service. She manages our legal hotline for Realtors and currently serves on the NAR Risk Management Issues Committee. Also with us today is David Salvatore, Vice President for Public Affairs at RI Realtors, Statewide MLS. He's responsible for crafting and advocating the organization's legislative agenda. David works with government officials, nonprofit organizations, and Realtors to effectively shape the organization's public policy, positions, and objectives. He currently serves as a staff liaison to the RIAR Government Affairs Committee, Public Policy and Political Advisory Coordinating Committee, RPAC Fundraising Committee, and the RPAC Board of Trustees. Also with us is Pam Hansen Carbone. She is a broker owner of Domain Properties. I had it incorrect on the slide. I apologize, Pam. It's Domain Properties. She's also a real estate commissioner for the Department of Business Regulations, a Pearson VUE pre-licensed subject matter expert for the general and state examinations. Thank you very much to our panelists. Before I turn everything over to Monica, I just want to go over the logistics. We are in webinar mode, as many of you probably know. While we do not have a chat, we do have the Q&A set up, and we welcome you to submit your questions. We will try to answer them in between. Most of the questions will be answered toward the end of the session, and any that we can't answer, we will answer afterwards. So look for the Q&A panel on your toolbar. And if there's a question you see on the panel that you would also like to have answered, use the thumbs up feature, and that will push that question to the top of the list. So I think that's all the logistics. So I will happily turn everything over to Monica Staff. Monica?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Bev. Thank you all for sending us so much love before we even open our mouths. And I just want to let you know, since I look like I'm sitting at the kids' table, I just got a note to raise my chair and did the opposite. So I will fix it while David's speaking. We're going to start off with David. We'll be talking about breaking government affairs news. And then we'll chime in with some questions that you might have in the audience. I'll speak about just what we're doing to help you comply with some of these new laws. And that'll be followed up, last but not least, with our commissioner and excellent pre-licensing instructor, Pam Hansen Carbone. So David, I'm going to turn off my video and fix my chair and let you go ahead. So take it away, and thank you, Bev, too.
Thank you, Monica. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to discuss the legislative session and what our Government Affairs Committee has been working on in the last 7 months. First, let me start off by thanking Ann and Bev and the team of professional development for putting this panel discussion together. I think it's really important that we have a conversation about what's happening in the General Assembly, what's happening in government across Rhode Island, because at the end of the day, many of the bills that are not only approved, but just considered, just discussed, impact your livelihoods and your client's ability to buy and sell property. So again, thank you for coordinating today's panel discussion. It's been a bear of a General Assembly session. I would say this has been the busiest in terms of the volume of bills that Realtors have taken positions on related to housing. And I know that this topic resonates with a lot of Rhode Islanders, but certainly Realtors understand this segment of our economy more than anybody. And that's why we are so respected in the State House and city and town halls across Rhode Island, because you all are the experts in the housing market. And when folks have questions about what's happening in our industry, the first comment that is made is call a Realtor. If you don't know, call your local Realtor, because if they don't know the answer, or if somebody else doesn't know the answer, they certainly do. So I'm very proud of the fact that we have great relationships with our members and members of the General Assembly and elected officials throughout the state. Every session we analyze and read every bill that is introduced in the General Assembly, whether it's related to housing or not. We want to make sure that if there is something embedded in a bill that might not be housing related, it could impact all of us. So we read thousands of bills literally every session. And housing, again, is at top of mind for many, many Rhode Islanders. And I think that's why members of the General Assembly have made this issue a priority. Whether we agree with the issues that they're presenting or not, everybody is talking about it. So between January and June, there were 2,643 bills introduced in the General Assembly. In the House of Representatives, there were 1,522, and in the Senate, 1,121. Now, our Government Affairs Committee tracked 367 of those bills. They were either related to housing or the general business climate in Rhode Island. And we acted on 79 of them, and we monitored 188. When I say we acted on 79 bills, that means we either testified verbally and or we delivered written testimony to the committees that were deliberating these pieces of legislation. We supported 40 bills, and of those 40 bills that we supported, 32 were approved. And I think that's really impressive for a trade association of our size, because it sends a clear message that we are engaged at the advocacy level and at the grassroots level of government. There were 106 bills opposed by the Rhode Island Association of Realtors. And of those 106 bills that we opposed, 99 of them did not make their way to the governor's desk for signature. So again, very proud of our Government Affairs Committee and the effort that they put in. I can confidently say that not every trade association and or lobbying group has the same success that we do in the Rhode Island State House. And again, it's because the volume of our members are engaged, not only politically, but they're engaged in public policy as well. They understand the issues. I would say in the last 7 years, we have cultivated relationships in a way that has allowed us to be on the front lines of introducing legislation that impact your buyers, your sellers, and your overall business. And over the last 7 years, we have introduced more than 25 bills, and our success rate is 83%, I believe. And that is unheard of. When lobbyists go to the State House, many of the questions that are asked are, who are you representing? How many bills are you introducing? And what are your top three? And what I tell our members is, if we introduce 5 bills in the General Assembly, the expectation is that the 5 bills are approved. And that's not always a guarantee, but we have one client, and that's all of you. So when we go to the State House and we ask legislators to introduce bills on our behalf, whether they be tax related, making it easier to buy and sell property, they're listening, because again, they rely on you, the experts, realtors in the field and in our Rhode Island communities on housing information. So they know that the bills that they are introducing on our behalf make a difference in our economy and the lives of everyday Rhode Islanders. This legislative session, we introduced 3 bills. The first one was around improving the residential real estate transaction process. And many folks who are buying and selling property don't know until they buy that first home that the disclosure statement that's required to be completed during the transaction consists of a lot of information that is not relevant to their specific transaction, specifically vacant land. So 1/3 of that disclosure statement includes vacant land. And there's a lot of legal jargon, and it is a lengthy document. So when that first-time home buyer is purchasing their home, we don't want them to have to go through information on a disclosure statement that, again, is not relevant to their specific purchase. So we asked the General Assembly to work with DBR and create a specific disclosure statement related to vacant land. And that bill was approved. And we thank Representative Joe Solomon from Warwick and Senator Mark McKinney from Warwick for introducing that bill on our behalf. Governor McKee did sign it into law on June 14th, just a day or two after that bill reached his desk. We often talk about consumer protection and why it's important that not only first-time home buyers, but all buyers of residential real estate are protected during that very large financial transaction. Many of you know that the disclosure statement is required in Rhode Island, and if it is not presented to a buyer in a timely manner, then that seller can or I'm sorry, the seller would be imposed a $100 civil penalty. Now, this civil penalty and this part of the general law was updated in 1992. Well, we're in 2023, and we thought it would be appropriate to put some teeth into the state statute and increase that civil penalty from $100 to $1,000. Many of you know that not every real estate licensee in Rhode Island is a realtor. And we want to make sure that the consumer is protected, especially during that largest financial transaction of their lifetime. We will be revisiting this piece of legislation next year. What we would like to do is create a time frame for that disclosure statement to be delivered to a buyer during the real estate transaction. And the last bill that we introduced is related to landlord and tenant statutes. And many of you know who are involved in rental property and rental management, that there is what's called the Landlord-Tenant Bill of Rights. The Landlord-Tenant Handbook. And that handbook hasn't been updated since 2007. I believe it's right now posted on the Attorney General's website. And again, we thought it was important that we mandate the state of Rhode Island to update that document every year so that tenants know what their rights are and homeowners understand what their rights and obligations are as well. We worked with the General Assembly. The new Housing Secretary, Stefan Pryor, expressed some concern about updating that annually since it hasn't been updated since 2007. But we did work with leaders in the General Assembly, and that document is now mandated to be updated every 2 years. And it will be posted on the state's website in English and Spanish. I believe it will be posted on the new Housing Secretary's website, the new Housing Department website. I suspect that the Attorney General will want to post it on that office's respective website as well, since the Attorney General from time to time does receive complaints relative to housing. You might have heard our 2023 President, Brian DeCruz. He was on 630 WPRO yesterday with Matt Allen discussing this very issue. And this is one of those we'll call bipartisan pieces of legislation that strikes a balance between landlords' rights and tenants' rights. And if you put it in writing in front of a homeowner and in front of a tenant, everybody knows what their obligations are for that rental property. So again, we went 3 for 3. Happy that that we're batting we batted 1,000 in this year's General Assembly in terms of bills that we introduced or the General Assembly introduced on our behalf. Other realtor wins in 2023, the historic tax credit sunset. Some of you know who are involved in commercial development that there's what's called the historic tax credit to preserve some older buildings in our state and preserve the character of many of our charming Rhode Island neighborhoods and communities. Every year, this bill is introduced. It's become a perennial bill where that sunset is extended or repealed, and then it's extended another year. I have expressed to leaders in both the House of Representatives and the Senate that we would like a more predictable formula around the historic tax credit, because we do believe that in this very difficult time of housing and the housing shortage across Rhode Island and the country, that we should be providing developers with every opportunity to develop properties and obviously preserve those very historic pieces of real estate in Rhode Island's communities. So that's a win for real estate in Rhode Island, since many of those projects include a housing component. This year, our marketing communications team introduced our membership survey. And it was surprising that the second or third risk-related issue that is top of mind for realtors is the cost of doing business. This General Assembly session, Senate President Dominic Ruggiero worked with the Rhode Island Public Expenditure Council in creating an initiative that provides for a $50,000 tangible property tax exemption for businesses. This impacts 85% of business owners in Rhode Island. So, brokers, when you submit your tangible property taxes to your municipality, your first $50,000 of assessment is exempt. So 85% of businesses in Rhode Island will not be paying anything in municipal tangible property taxes. That's a very big win, not only for the realtor community, but the business community across Rhode Island. And we were happy to get behind that bill in strong support. As you know, there's been a strong focus on production in Rhode Island. Many of you know, on the development side, we have a lot of catching up to do with the rest of the country in terms of housing starts and permits. We rank last in the nation in that space. Production. We want to make sure that developers can do what they do best, and that's build houses and some commercial development that includes housing. So Speaker Shekarchi in the House of Representatives has made this his legislative priority. And there were several bills of importance to us, and I won't go through every one of them, but they range from creating transit-oriented development to eliminating the State Housing Appeals Board and putting that process in the courts, so expediting that appeal process, and also creating a housing and land use court within our judiciary. Right now, it's very difficult to make development go through the judicial process because they don't have a separate housing and land use court. Other states in the country do, and Rhode Island thought it was important that we do the same thing. The Speaker and the House of Representatives also wants to make it easier for commercial developers to have permitted uses such as adaptive creative reuse, making that process easier to create more housing supply in Rhode Island. And then finally, removing some of the permitting steps. Right now, there are 3 steps that have to be taken in that permitting process for developers. That has been reduced to 2 steps now. So the Speaker thought that was important, and we were happy to get behind that bill. Before I move on to any to bills that we successfully defeated in the State House, are there any questions about bills that we supported, or is there anything that you heard in the news that was approved that I can answer for anybody at this time?
Hey, David, we do have one question in the Q&A. I provided a written answer, but that was from Mac McDougall. The question is, what is the website where they'll post the updated Landlord-Tenant Act on?
Currently, it's on, I believe, the Attorney General's website, and the document clearly states that it was dated in 2007. But again, we'll be working with the Housing Secretary in terms of where that will be posted. As many of you know, we as an association send out on a regular basis the Realtor Digest. We'll be communicating this document as it's updated regularly with our members.
And David, we've got a couple, thank you for that. We've got a couple more. I'll take them out of order because I know one of them you're just about to talk about. Okay. Steve Antoni asks, what was the reason that the seller disclosure bill did not pass?
The seller disclosure bill did pass. So the 3 bills that were introduced on behalf of the Rhode Island Association of Realtors, 2 related to the disclosure statement and the landlord-tenant handbook. All 3 of those bills were approved by the General Assembly and signed by Governor McKay.
Perfect. Okay, we also have, what is the timeline for the new landlord-tenant handbook?
Great question. Brian DeCruz discussed this yesterday on the radio. This bill is effective January 1st, 2024, and it's to be updated every 2 years. So I interpret the bill to state that the Housing Secretary has between January 1, 2024 and January 1, 2026 to update that bill in its entirety. And then subsequent to January 1, 2026, it will be updated every 2 years based on either regulations that are approved at DBR or legislation that's approved by the General Assembly.
Perfect. And so that, and then we'll post a link to it on our website too. So you don't have to memorize all this. We can find it there. We had a question. This is probably more for Bev or Ann, but will we receive a recording of this? I believe the session is being recorded, but.
Yes, the session is being recorded and we will be posting it. So keep an eye out on your email And remember to add rirealtors.org to your safe senders list so you see our emails in your inbox.
Thank you, Bev. It's kind of like magic how she pops up there. Okay, and then the other question, David, I know you're just starting to get into some of the other legislation, but this is probably the burning question for a lot of our listeners today from Butch Simino. David, what was our stance on the new law requiring independent contractors to pay a $50 fee every year? And let me add his editorial comment, because I know you're ready for this question. Realtor fees in total across the whole spectrum are high enough without incurring yet another avenue for the government to nickel and dime us again, affecting our bottom line once again. Take it away, Dave.
Thank you for asking that question. And I know there is a lot of confusion around this. Right now, Tara Granahan on 630 WPRO is reporting on a Fox Business News story that is very inaccurate regarding this very issue. So during the General Assembly session, some members of the legislature introduced a bill that would require all independent contractors, including realtors and real estate licensees, to file an annual notice of designation with the Department of Labor and Training. And attached to that annual designation notice was a $50, and I'll call it what it is, a $50 tax. It's not a fee, it's a tax, or it would have been a tax. And we worked diligently with members of the General Assembly on why it was important to remove that provision from the bill. You're absolutely right. The cost of doing business for a realtor is much higher in Rhode Island than it is in other states. And while $50 per year might not seem like a lot of money, it's not only the principle of it, but quite frankly, it would have been a money grab, for the lack of a better term, by the state government. And if you just look at our membership alone, more than 6,000 members, you can do the math. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars just from the realtor community. That doesn't include gig economy workers and independent contractors in other sectors of the economy as well. I am proud to say that we worked very hard, and thanks to the hundreds of realtors who reached out to their respective state legislators through our call for action, that $50 tax was removed from the bill. What you will be required to do as real estate licensees is file an annual notice of designation with the Department of Labor and Training. That is to be done on an annual basis. However, the new statute is silent on when that is due to DLT. But I will say that the Department of Labor and Training will take that list of independent contractors and they will submit that list to the Department of Taxation to ensure that folks are paying their taxes. I understand it's one more thing to do as a business owner and independent contractor, but our biggest argument with that bill was, as you say, nickeling, diming our members for $50 every year. And again, I'm proud of the hundreds of realtors who came out and supported and acted through that call for action, because that certainly demonstrated to legislators how a strength in numbers. Speaking of independent contractors, once again, there was legislation introduced to change the definition of employee. And changing the definition of employee would have impacted independent contractors. Now, this is a discussion that's happening in Washington, D.C. I know President Biden has talked about this. Some members of Congress have talked about this, and our national association is addressing it at the national level. But in other states, there have been efforts to change that definition. And by changing the definition of employee to include independent contractors would, again, be costly to realtors across Rhode Island. And it would also jeopardize your ability to work in a way that is really based on your needs as a business owner, your needs as a realtor. And it also ultimately impacts the consumer. Because right now, the flexibility that many of your agents have in the field is what allows people to buy and sell properties. So I'm happy to say that we defeated that bill once again. I suspect that it will come up. But again, we will be on the front lines of this issue, and I can't see it being approved anytime soon. We talked about the realtor tax that was defeated through our call for action. Another issue that we've heard from members regarding on a regular basis is home inspectors and electrical panels. There is an effort, there has been an effort in the State House to not allow home inspectors to conduct the electrical inspection portion of the real estate inspection process. So we've heard from members, we've heard that this is, once again, it's either a cost of doing business for the member. It could be a cost of buying your new home if a home inspector is not allowed to do what they are required to do under their federal guidelines and what they're required to do under their state license. And that is to inspect electrical panels during the real estate transaction process. We worked with legislative leaders. We explained to them why this was a bad bill. We also worked with home inspectors. I actually attended a meeting of the board of the Contractors Registration and Licensing Board several months ago, and we convinced that group to oppose the bill as drafted because this would have impacted not only first-time home buyers but all home buyers, and it would have added an additional $500, $1,000 to that real estate transaction. And as you know, the electrical trade is an aging profession. So trying to get an electrician at your property during the real estate transaction could have been a lengthy process. And in this very competitive real estate market, that could have made or broken a transaction. So happy to say that we defeated that bill as well, thanks to the advocacy efforts of our members. Short-term rentals. We have members on both sides of this issue. And I think from a private property right perspective, we have to take a comprehensive look at how short-term rentals are regulated at both the state level, at the local level. I think there's some confusion around who's responsible for regulating short-term rentals. In this session, there were probably 24 bills introduced between the House and the Senate around short-term rentals. We testified in opposition to many, many bad bills related to short-term rentals from a regulation perspective to a taxing perspective. None of the bills were passed. Something that we could get behind is creating a commission to take a comprehensive look at short-term rentals in Rhode Island, how and where they're regulated, and ultimately how they're impacting the real estate market. We'll have many members go to the General Assembly and testify, members of the public and other associations such as the Hospitality Association, and state on the record that it's short-term rentals that are impacting housing in Rhode Island. They're responsible for the housing shortage in Rhode Island. And I've done a lot of research on this, and I can't find a solid piece of literature that states, an accurate piece of literature that states short-term rentals are impacting the housing market in Rhode Island or anywhere else in the country for that matter. Do they cause quality of life issues? Sure they do. All rentals do from time to time. But again, we shouldn't be painting this broad brush with every short-term rental in Rhode Island. We shouldn't be allowing municipalities to introduce ordinances that are egregious and go against our principles and private property rights. But at the same time, we want to be thoughtful around some of the legislation and regulations that are introduced and what our role is. So I'm happy to say that a commission has been created in the House of Representatives. We will have representation along with other groups, and I'm looking forward to having some constructive dialogue around reasonable regulation that preserves our community's quality of life while making it easy for property owners to rent out their property. And finally, there were a couple of landlord-tenant bills that were approved. One was part of the Speaker's housing package, and that included the elimination of rental application fees. I know a lot of you have heard about this issue during your travels in the state. There seems to be some confusion around what a property owner can and cannot do. I can tell you that moving forward, a blanket fee is prohibited in Rhode Island. But what a homeowner can do is they can ask for a government-produced background check and they can ask for a credit check from the prospective tenant. Now, none of this prohibits a property owner from doing their own due diligence, and it would be at a cost to the homeowner to conduct their own credit check, their own background check. And if a prospective tenant doesn't produce these documents within 90 days of the rental application, then the homeowner can charge for the exact cost of a credit check and a criminal background check. Okay. And the second landlord-tenant bill that was approved is regarding the courts and sealing of court files in residential eviction proceedings. Right now, you can look on the state's website. You can see all this information, even if a motion was approved in a defendant's favor. The courts now will seal that document if a judgment is made in the favor of a defendant. And finally, the last bill I want to talk about, and I know Monica is going to talk about several bills around lead and lead mitigation, but I do want to discuss one of them, and that's regarding lead pipes. Some of you are aware of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that was approved by the Congress and signed by President Biden about a year and a half ago. And included in that bill was an allocation of hundreds of millions of dollars for states to eliminate lead pipes in private property. Unlike other measures in the past, in Rhode Island, this will not be an unfunded mandate. Private property owners now have an opportunity to replace lead pipes, not only on the public side at no cost, but on the private side at no cost either. Rhode Island received $141 million to address this issue. It's been assessed that to address every lead pipe in Rhode Island, it will cost approximately $225 million. I don't see an instance where certain property owners are going to have to pay to replace their lead pipes on the private side. I don't see the government picking winners and losers in this issue. So there is an inspection process. It does have to be disclosed if there is the presence of lead in or on the property during the real estate transaction, as many of you know. But I do think that this is a win in terms of not creating another unfunded mandate. Okay, so that's all that I have. I know Monica has some other regulatory issues that she wants to talk about, and some legislation as well that was approved around lead and shoreline access. But she is the legal brains behind the association, so I'm going to let her handle those two pieces of information and issues. But again, Monica, happy to answer any questions regarding not only the bills that we successfully defeated, but any bill that was introduced that is on the minds of our members.
David, thanks for that update. I think you have so much content there. We could probably have 3 hours just listening to give us a legislative update. But anyway, we really appreciate all the work that you do, that the Government Affairs Committee does, and individual members, like you said, by contacting legislators. And you're already getting some applause from the audience.
Thank you. Can I make one last pitch?
Yes, you may.
Or one pitch to our members. Most of you, if not all of you, know what RPAC is. And this is an investment in your livelihood. And you don't have to be involved in politics. You don't have to love politics. You don't have to hate politics to be involved in RPAC. But RPAC allows our association with the ability to invest in political candidates who have our backs. Invest in political candidates who can introduce bills on our behalf, educate their colleagues in the General Assembly. Okay, so on RIRPAC.org is our new brochure around RPAC. And we get questions throughout the year. What does RPAC do for me? Why am I spending my personal money on a political action committee? Well, we created a new brochure for RPAC, and it explains what the program is, why it's important to you and your livelihood, and some of the wins that we've had. Now, these are only probably 15 to 20 issues that we have either successfully approved in the General Assembly or were successful in defeating. During the pandemic, we made sure that open houses remained available to realtors. So this is where RPAC is important. And I would respectfully ask, if you're a broker, get your agents involved in RPAC. Go on the website, take a look at the new brochure, because I don't think a lot of our members do, but there are some members who don't know what the RPAC program is and why it's important to invest in. So I'd respectfully ask, if you haven't made your RPAC investment this year, to do so. And if you're a broker, please share this new brochure with your agents so that they know what the program is and why it's important.
Good pitch. This message was brought to you by RPAC. We do have a bunch of questions about the rental application law that just came in. Yes. So some of these might be legal. But let's see. Let's start with the softball question. Are we going to be printing any of these brochures? Hannah from Newport had asked that. So
yes, we have some printed brochures, Hannah, here at RIAR. And if you're hosting an event, and if you think that the printed brochures will be helpful, let us know and we can have some printed for you.
Excellent. So everyone who's watching, I'm taking reverse order. So Nancy asked about our stance on the shoreline access bill. So I'll be covering just some legal tips about the shoreline access bill shortly. So stay tuned. But David, did you want to say anything about that? Or
yeah, when the bill was first introduced, Nancy, we did take a position in opposition to the bill. We spoke with legislators on why we took that strong position. And then we heard from members throughout the state, some who were in support of the legislation, others who were strongly opposed to the legislation. So based on some of the findings and recommendations that we heard in the commission that was created around this issue, the Government Affairs Committee decided not to take a position on the shoreline access bill this year.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we've got 3 questions about rental applications, and then we'll kind of hold up the questions for a bit so I can get through my spiel and then save time for our Commissioner Pam, and we can go back to things. Okay. So one of the questions is from Warren, and that is, so third-party apps are not acceptable for obtaining the credit and background checks if the applicant pays directly to the company.
So a homeowner can use a third-party app. What they cannot do is, if the prospective tenant provides those government-produced documents to the homeowner cannot charge them for it. But if a homeowner wanted to use that third party, they can certainly do that.
Perfect, thank you. Then we have another question from Nancy. This is if a potential tenant does not produce a background and credit check, can the homeowner refuse to rent them?
Monica, I will defer to you on that
one. I was going to say that might be more of a legal question. Yes, you could do that. As long as you've got something in writing from the landlord to say, if you're acting as a rental agent or property manager, make sure you've got those written instructions from the landlord. If you're listing the property in MLS, the rental, make sure to put that in as an instruction so that people know, just as you see with sales, some sellers want to have a pre-approval before a showing, for example. So you'd want to do the same thing with a rental. I will say, though, so far, most of the calls I've gotten about this new law, and I think David as well, is more people saying, I don't really trust the tenant's background and credit check. I want to still run my own. So you may be seeing more of the opposite of that, but certainly a good question. Okay, and then we have a question from Mac. So what this means is that, I think you may have just covered this, but I'll read it anyway. So what this means is that the MyRental app screening process that I use to screen potential tenants, I now have to pay for each potential tenant to do so.
Yes. Again, you don't have to. You don't have to use that third-party program, but if you want to, you're not prohibited from doing that. You cannot charge the tenant if they're producing those documents for you already. But if you wanted to conduct an extensive background check using that third-party program or application, you can certainly do that.
Okay. And then finally, okay, then I'm stopping. Finally, we have a question from Nicole. What is the exact name of the rental application bill, please? So I don't know if you want to post a link in chat, or Nicole, I'll just mention as I'm giving David some time because I see his screen flashing. I am writing an article for the Realtor Digest that will come out sometime next week. And so anytime I write about new laws, I'll include the link in there. And if David finds it in the meantime, not to put him under pressure, but he can post it in the Q&A for everybody. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on. So my piece, as you've heard from David, a lot of laws passed this legislative session. And so I work with our Forms Committee, which is comprised of fellow realtors and also the Risk Management Committee. So the Risk Management Committee so both of those two committees, Forms is already working on changing some of our forms to comply with the new laws. I'll talk about some of those briefly. I know that our Forms Committee committee, which is chaired by Ryan Antrup, will be having a marathon session next week to make sure that we can get all the proper forms updated in time. But I'll go through those in greater detail. The Risk Management Committee, which is chaired by John Dolan, they put together things like fact sheets and tips, videos, things like that to help bring you into compliance. A lot of these laws are going into effect at different times. As David said, some of them won't go into effect until January of next year. So we do have some time. Most of them will take place next year. So anyway, all right, so let me go into a few specifics. So besides talking about some of the things we'll be working on, I also want to mention briefly an update on antitrust litigation. And I'll do that, and I just want to let you know what else to expect during my part of the presentation. Some of you may have seen that MLS PIN in our neighboring state of Massachusetts was sued for alleged antitrust violations, along with some brokerages. MLS PIN has entered into a settlement agreement that needs to be approved by the court. So I'll get back to that in a few minutes about what that might mean for the rest of us. In the meantime, David has just posted a link to the rental application bill that Nicola just asked us about. So if you take a look at your Q&A, and please feel free to continue to post questions for David or me, or if you have anything that you might want to ask about the Real Estate Commission, feel free to post that in Q&A while we're moving things along here. And then finally, I'll also mention just a quick reminder and some tips about vacant land scams and a new scam that I just heard about from Virginia involving the bios and about us section of realtors on brokerage websites. So hold on for that. Let's get through some of the new laws first. Okay, I think David did a very thorough job talking about the rental application law. One thing I do want to point out is that if you do decide that you want to, if the tenant does not provide you with a credit check or criminal background check, and so you decide to run one and charge the tenant for it, for that check, if you do that, you'll be legally required to give the tenant a copy of that credit report or criminal background check at no extra charge. So if you already charge him, I'll make up a number, $35, let's say that were the cost of the credit check, then you would have to give the tenant a copy of the credit report at no charge other than the actual cost of it. And by the way, since this is not going to go into effect until January, so we do have time, the Forms Committee is working on the RIAR rental application form. And so for any of you who use that, I know some of you probably have your own application forms, but we will be bringing that into compliance to include things like check boxes so that rental applicants can say, are they providing you with a credit report? Are they providing you with a criminal background check or not? If they're not, what is the fee that you will be charging them to run those reports, either of those reports yourself? So that's something to keep an eye on. David mentioned also about lead. Lead, there are a number of lead bills, new lead laws that are going into effect, most of them not until January of next year. As David mentioned, the Attorney General has made enforcement of lead laws a high top priority for his administration. So the lead laws have been into effect, at least the lead hazard mitigation laws have been in effect for we're getting close to 20 years now. But there hasn't been a ton of enforcement at a practical level. For the most part, unfortunately, the enforcement has been a child gets exposed to high levels of lead and is poisoned, then the state moves in to sanction the landlord, make sure the property is fixed up, et cetera, getting the child medical treatment. So now the Attorney General is taking the exact opposite approach with some of these new laws. What you will see starting in January of 20, and again, you don't have to take notes on these things. We will be providing tips throughout the year for you, and you'll also have a recording of this session. One thing to expect, if nothing else that you take away from my presentation, is if you yourself own rental property built before 1978, or working with landlords who own residential rental property built before 1978, start getting those certificates of conformance now, because there will be a huge backlog on this. What will happen would be one of the laws that passed requires the Department of Health to create a registry of lead hazard certificates. Every landlord in the state with property built before 78 will be required to register with the Department of Health if they have the funds to set this up. You'll have to indicate when the dates of your lead certificates and make sure to keep those so anyone in the state will be able to check that out. Currently, there's a database where you can just look up an address of a property and see if they're lead certificates. This will be more detailed. Also, the biggest incentive that will change is that if a landlord does not have current lead certificates, the tenant will have a legal right to petition the district court and pay their rent to the court instead of to the landlord. So I say it again. They will be able to petition the district court and pay their rent there instead of to the landlord until the landlord gets valid current lead certificates. That is huge. Believe me when I say that legal services or anyone else who represents tenants, they certainly are aware of this law and they will be prepared for it. So and I think that what will happen is I'd anticipate a big backlog. There aren't a huge supply of lead inspectors currently in the state. So if you want to start getting clients on that now, making you aware of that now, that would really be good, because January 1st and September 1st of next year will be here before we know it. The other thing is, before owner-occupied 2- and 3-family properties, rental properties, were exempt from the lead law. Starting in January, that will change. They will no longer be exempt. So basically, if you're renting property built before 1978, assume, regardless of whether children are living there, assume that you'll need to get a lead certificate for that property. Okay, I always get the good news. You notice David spoke about all the exciting, positive things that happened. I get all the negative stuff to report on. Thank you, David. Anyway, he's laughing at me. All right, just a couple of other things I just want to mention about lead. Yeah, heckler. Okay. I know lawyers were used to being the buzzkill, right? No one wants us at parties. The other thing is, I just want to mention that the penalties for violating lead laws have already actually increased to potentially double and triple damages plus attorney's fees. So in other words, if you don't have a lead certificate and are required to, someone could actually file suit and pursue you for double or triple damages because the lead is not in compliance. Like I said, believe me, tenants are going to know about this. So I think that's all I need to mention about lead at the moment. I did promise giving an update about the shoreline access bill, and David gave a brief update as well. So bottom line, effective actually at the end of June, once the governor signed the bill, that if you haven't already heard, members of the public can now walk on any beach or use any beach in the state up to 10 feet above the high tide line, also called the seaweed level line. That is a really big change. Before, it was the mean high tide line. No one knew what it was. No one knew where they could walk. So for the most part, people would have to just kind of wade in the water and hope that a property owner didn't yell at them. The reason I mention this, so this is huge for any of you who don't own private waterfront or beachfront property yourselves. This is great. You can go where you want to. However, as long as it's 10 feet above the high tide line or seaweed line. However, if you own the property, you might have a very different perspective. You may have heard that there is a group of property owners who own coastal property who joined together, and they are challenging this new law in district court, federal district court, and they are arguing that it is a taking, an unconstitutional taking of their property by allowing members of the public to walk on what they had purchased as a private beach. What I would suggest to you, though, is if any of you are working with buyers of waterfront property or representing buyers of waterfront property, just let them know about this law. We'll put out some more information about it, but you might have already seen, for example, in the Providence Journal had a video clip of an incident with the Charlestown police. They showed a member of the public walking onto a private beach. The person was stopped by a security guard. The person who crossed into the private property then said, hey, you can't stop me from, setting up my chair, from walking on the beach. Didn't you hear about the new law? They had an, kind of a discussion on the phone with the owner of the property and the Charlestown police. So they were making it clear, the Charlestown police, hey, until a court tells us otherwise, this law is in effect. So just make sure that it's something that you want to chat with your property owners and potential buyers of coastal property about. Okay. All right. I think that I have. Okay. I just want to add one other piece about legislation, then we'll get to scams and antitrust. Okay. So some of the things that David talked about, like the new lead sales disclosure form, that is something that the Forms Committee is working on. We have a draft, and so by the end of the summer or early September, we expect to have a lead disclosure form. A separate land disclosure form. And so that way you won't have to explain to sellers why they have a bunch of questions about a roof or, have you ever had flooding in the basement when it's vacant land? So that would be available. One thing that's changed a little bit is in the past, the laws said that the Department of Business Regulation may create a sales disclosure form. The new law, and this actually was not our original wording, the new law says that they must create a disclosure form. Disclosure forms for vacant land and other forms of disclosure. So what we're going to be doing is working with the Department of Business Regulation and letting them and the commission use the Rhode Island Association of Realtors forms. Since these are forms that members of the public fill out, we think it's better to have consistency across the state. So watch for that and watch for some changes in the sales disclosure forms. You'll also see some new lead disclosures later on this year. The Department of Health is working on those just to update and bring all their fact sheets into compliance with these new laws. You'll see a little bit of change in the purchase and sales agreements. Nothing major. I don't want to freak people out with all of this change. It's mainly to bring things into compliance. We need to make a couple of tweaks in the inspection section having to do with lead. So watch for those. And I'll go back and take some questions in a moment, but let me finish. And I just want to make sure that we have time for Pam to speak before we get too far on this. All right, let me speak about vacant land scams briefly. We've had all kinds of information about them and the MLS pop-up screen on RIRealtors.org, et cetera, when these first started popping up in January, late January. So if you haven't heard or experienced this, long story short is you may be contacted by a scammer who is posing as the owner of vacant land. The person says, hey, I want you to list this property for me. They might be in a rush, etc. What happens is even if you do your due diligence and check town assessment records to look for the name, confirm the name of the owner and the mailing address of the owner for tax purposes, what the scammers will usually do is say like, oh yeah, well, I just moved to California, or I'm traveling in South Africa, or I live in Canada now, or something like that. So they claim to have a different address. What you want to do is, and then the idea is they want to pose as the listing broker of the property. What they're hoping as the seller of the property. What they're hoping will happen is that a buyer will purchase the property. All the closing attorney will send all the funds to the scammer, and they don't own the property, and the money is long gone by the time people figure it out. So far, I've only heard of a couple of these actually getting to the point of closing in Rhode Island. So I think we're doing a good job with educating, trying to prevent this from happening. So a couple of tips. If you get someone who contacts you out of the blue and they only want to communicate in one way. You know, they only want to email you. They only want to talk on the phone. They only want to use WhatsApp for communications. If the story is just a little bit, you know, kind of not hanging together, what I would strongly suggest that you do is, excuse me, offer to get them on some kind of video conferencing, Facebook Live, Zoom, Teams, Skype, anything like that. A real scammer is not going to want to show you their face. They have sophisticated ways to defraud people. They don't want to see your face. So that's one quick way to kind of disrupt things. The other is what you might want to do is suggest to your customers and clients, especially if you know of anyone who has vacant land or, you know, friends of yours, set up a Google alert for the property. That might be a good tip that you can share on social media or any kind of newsletters or mailings that you do to your database. If you set up a Google alert with the update with the address of the property, that way if someone's trying to market it or someone's trying to do something with it, the person will receive an alert. Because some of these listings have made their way into MLS. We believe that we caught all of them and we're able to pull them out. But you don't want to waste your time and money, and you certainly don't want to have the reputation of listing a property from a scammer, even if it wasn't necessarily your fault. Okay, finally, I know I'm rattling a lot of stuff off as usual, but let me just give you the antitrust update. As I'm sure that you've heard, there are a number of class action lawsuits against the National Association of Realtors, a number of multiple listing services across the country, knocking on wood, not statewide multiple listing service at this point. And so one of the class actions, the class action lawsuits are about, they're challenging the structure of multiple listing service and also about how some brokers and the National Association of Realtors structure compensation. The simplest form of the argument is they're saying sellers are paying too much in commissions because of the way that MLS is structured. MLS requires listing brokers to make a blanket offer of compensation. So these sellers and plaintiffs' attorneys are arguing that, you know, hey, you're forcing me, in order for me to have my property marketed in multiple listing service where I want it to be, you're forcing me to offer the same amount of money to any potential cooperating broker, regardless of their level of experience. They're also negotiating against me. How is that fair? It's one size fits all in terms of compensation. The National Association of Realtors has made a number of arguments against that, but that is that's the premise of it. MLS PIN was named in a separate lawsuit, and as I said, they've entered into a settlement agreement that will not go into effect until it's actually approved by a judge. Here are a couple of takeaways from that proposed settlement agreement. The settlement agreement would eliminate the mandatory offer of compensation. Eliminate the mandatory offer of compensation. MLS PIN is privately owned and not affiliated with the National Association of Realtors. So they're able to do that if they choose. So that would mean there's another privately owned MLS called Northwest MLS in the state of Washington. They voluntarily did this several years ago. They eliminated the mandatory offer of compensation. For the most part, they've reported the vast majority of listings still offer compensation, but they're not required to do so. Back to MLS PIN. So the other thing is that if the settlement goes through, listing brokers will be required to notify sellers in writing before the listing goes into MLS that they're not legally required to offer compensation, and that also if they do offer compensation, that compensation can be negotiated. So the big question that I've been getting, and I know that our MLS folks have been getting, is what are we doing at statewide MLS? Do we still have a mandatory offer of compensation? The answer is yes. Since statewide MLS is affiliated with the National Association of Realtors, we follow their rules, as do most of the MLSs in the country. So we have no plans, any kind of immediate plans or plans at all to eliminate the mandatory offer of compensation. There's still a lot going on with these lawsuits across the country, and we're taking a wait and see approach. But bottom line is we could not make the change, even if we wanted to, without authorization from the National Association of Realtors. But as far as what can you do about this and, you know, how will this affect these other lawsuits? What you can do is something that I know that our Department of Professional Development has been pushing, some brokers have been pushing. Get comfortable with explaining how you're paid when you're working with a buyer. Use a buyer representation agreement. We have tons of classes. I know some brokerages also offer tips and training on how to have the conversation with the buyer. If you're not ready to use a buyer representation contract yet, here's a baby step you can take, although it might feel like a giant step. Explain when you first meet with a buyer, don't just kind of gloss over it. Explain how you get paid. You're being paid by the listing broker, or however that works out. You may need to ask for compensation from the seller, depending on what the amount is. But make sure to have open conversations with buyers about that. The more comfort that you have with compensation, how you get paid, the more buyers understand it, and the less likely it is that they're going to hopefully hop from one open house, ditch you after all the work you've done and buy a property at an open house that leaves you out in the cold. So continue to do that. Final tip on antitrust, and then I'm really done yakking, is social media. I know social media is an excellent way to market so many properties, show your value to consumers, etc. But when you go on social media, sometimes people get riled up over other brokerages' compensation policies. Not to make light of that, what people might feel upset at times. But if someone's posting on social media, so-and-so is a greedy jerk, and they name somebody, if you post even if you just like that or comment, the Justice Department is using, and others are using, artificial intelligence to check out social media postings. It's like signing a confession. If you're posting something like, well, this is what we're going to do because we don't like this broker, or we think their policies are unfair. If you're putting that out there on social media in writing, it's there forever. Even if you try and remove it, someone may have taken a screenshot of it. So just be really careful about what you post. Stick to doing what you do best. Marketing yourself, marketing properties, showing the value of your services. Okay, I have talked plenty and we need to save time for Pam. Let me see if we have a couple of quick questions to knock off. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll get back to those. After Pam has had a chance to speak. Okay, let me just scroll really quickly. Guidance. Yeah, we did have a question more on the rental application. Do we have any guidance about helping realtors handle verification of applicant provided credit and background checks? Yes, we'll be providing all kinds of tips. Feel free to contact me directly if you have any specific issues that you want us to address in terms of giving tips. See some questions about lead certificates. Why don't I hold on to those questions for now? I promise I will answer those. And let me turn things over to Pam Hanson-Carbone, our representative from the Real Estate Commission. Pam has done more. Before I let you talk, I'm just going to say, Pam, you have done more to shed a light on what the Real Estate Commission does than anybody. You've been encouraging people to come to commission meetings and kind of demystifying what happens over in Cranston at DBR. So Pam, take it away, and I will try and answer some questions in writing while you're speaking. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Monica. Hi, everybody. So let me just start by talking about what the Real Estate Commission is. So the Real Estate Commission is 9 members that have been appointed by the Rhode Island governor. And it's usually based on skill and a solid working knowledge of the Rhode Island statutory law and how it applies to our profession. And our job as commissioners is to advise on policy to the department as it pertains to consumer protection and licensee education. And so I use the word licensee, and I think that's important to remember. All of us are licensees. And if we choose to, and our brokerage chooses to, we become realtors. So there's a difference there. All of us are licensees, which means we have the ability to practice real estate. And then we can choose to be a part of a professional organization, which allows us to be realtors. So there's a little bit of a difference there. And the Department of Business Regulations, specifically the Real Estate Commission, is about all licensees. So when I talk about that, I usually use the word licensees. So currently what the Real Estate Commission is looking at is mandatory post-licensing education for new licensees within the first 24 months of practice. Now, this would not be something that would be retroactive, so it wouldn't be anything that if you have just received your license or any of your of the licensees within your firm have received their license, this would apply to coming in new licensees. And what we're looking at is expanding making specific the 24 hours of education that is required. Currently we have 21 hours that is required, core and that mix up of core and general education, plus the Rhode Island Fair Housing. What the commission is looking at now is taking that 24 hours for a new licensee and creating the curriculum. So they wouldn't get to just choose the curriculum. It would be a specific curriculum that they would have to take within their first 24 months of practice. And the idea is that this curriculum would be to ensure core competencies of that licensee as they serve the public in the purchasing of residential real estate. So what the commission has done is they have created a task force, and I oversee that task force. And that task force is made up of educators throughout the state of every pre-license school that was in effect when we began the task force. What we've done so far is we've surveyed all of those task force members and our commission members to see what topics we felt should be explained and further taught to a new licensee in their first 24 months of practice. Those recommendations, I believe, can be found on the DBR website in the minutes of our meeting. We have created within the task force, we've started to create those classes or create the outline for those, the outline of what those classes would be. And I believe at our next meeting, we are going to sort of finalize on what those classes how they would be structured, and then put that in front of the legislative body. I think that's about all I have to say. I would also recommend any of you, especially brokers, but any licensee that wants to speak on or has an opinion or a question about any of the statutory regulations that oversee our profession, to come to those meetings. They are open to the public, they're an open forum, and they really are, I think we all try to be pretty welcoming. So there's many people that have started to come, and I hope to see many more people at those commission meetings. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Pam.
If I can, excuse me,
Yes.
Monica, if I can, I just would like to applaud Pam for her effort with this task force. It's been a monumental task. I'm grateful that Monica and I were invited to participate, but it's an inordinate amount of work dealing with, school administrators, not just our school, but every school in the state. And it's a volunteer position. It's a gubernatorial appointment, but bottom line, it's a volunteer position. And she has done, not because she's one of our instructors, don't take this the wrong way, I'm looking at it through the lens of a real estate commissioner. She really has gone above and beyond to advocate for every licensee, but also to work with every school administrator to keep things as they should be. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone's thoughts have been entertained and focused, because some of us can kind of get out of line, not to mention any names or don't look at anyone in particular, but we can be very vocal because we are school administrators. But Pam's done an excellent job, and I can't thank you enough.
My pleasure.
We do, and that was Ann Enos, the Director of Professional Development, who some of you were wondering why she wasn't introduced before. Ann will be giving us a quick preview of coming attractions at the very end of the session, so you want to stay tuned for that. We do have a couple of questions for Pam and then a bunch for me. So why don't we go with Pam first, since Commissioner Pam. All right, Pam, since I already got my license, this new post-licensing requirement would not apply to me?
That is correct. It will not apply retrospectively, so it will only apply to new licensees getting their license once that regulation becomes statutory law.
Excellent. And another question for you, where can we find the schedule for commission meetings?
Oh, you can find it on the Department of Business Regulations website.
Perfect. Yeah, if you haven't gone to the DBR website lately, once you go on, you just want to go under the real estate section, and then you'll find it there, and you'll also find the names of who the other commissioners are too. Okay. All right, let's go back to a couple of things. Let me address some of the compensation issues, and then I see that we have a bunch of questions about lead. Some of these, I think, and just we'll see how we're doing on time, but some of these, I am putting together guidance on the changes in the lead law that we will also post on rirealtors.org and in the Realtor Digest if we've got room for the issue that will come out sometime next week. Anyway, but let me, so anything I don't get to, it's not to duck your question, but I'll put it in terms of a frequently asked questions guidance. Okay, so one of the questions is, can you address, and by the way, just for antitrust purposes, I don't want to discuss, since we have people who are listening who are from different brokerages, legally you're all competitors, so I'm not going to mention like any dollar amounts or specific commissions. I'll just take that out of the answer. Let me start by saying that multiple listing service legally cannot require anyone to pay a specific split of compensation or dollar amount of compensation. As long as compensation is offered, then the listing, and it's an exclusive listing, it can go into MLS. If you're on the receiving end of that, let's say someone were offering a penny. Okay, I'll make that one up. Someone's offering a penny as compensation to a cooperating broker. How do you get paid? One is if you're using a buyer representation agreement, you can put wording in there that the buyer will pay you, and will agree to pay you a certain amount. They'll authorize you to get it from the listing broker or seller. If you can't, the buyer can pay that. So far, what we're finding in the state of Rhode Island, according to closing attorneys, is that buyers are able to finance that, assuming the property appraises. Another option is going to be putting it in the purchase and sales agreement. This is one of these things that I always call it kind of hair splitting, because you've probably been told you can't use the purchase and sales agreement to negotiate compensation. What you can do, if the buyer agrees and you're representing a buyer, make the purchase and sales agreement subject to the seller paying the cooperating broker X amount or X percentage. So be subject to the seller paying that. What you can't do, because it's a violation of the Code of Ethics, is to make it subject to the listing broker paying you a different amount of compensation than what the listing broker had offered. Another option before you even get to the purchase and sales agreement is picking up the phone and contacting the listing broker. Okay, some won't budge, some have room for negotiation. See if you can work it out that way. If the listing broker agrees to pay you a different amount than what's offered in MLS, sign a compensation to cooperating broker form. It's a Rhode Island Association of Realtors form, and that way it explains you've got something in writing saying what the listing broker will offer you. One quick comment I have to say also about, maybe nothing I'm saying is quick. I keep saying quick, but I talk in paragraphs, occupational hazard. But let me just say that over the years, there have been a ton of changes in real estate. Sometimes I feel like I graduated from law school when the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth. But let me say this, think of all the changes. I know you've gotten into real estate at different times. I'm not saying that change is always easy, but when I first started working for the Massachusetts Association of Realtors in the early 90s, at that time, everybody represented sellers. When I've said this to newer agents, people are kind of going like, what? How does that make any sense? That was the time. Everybody only represented sellers. Even if you're working with the buyer or best friends with the buyer, your loyalty was towards the seller. You're a seller's subagent. Okay, when I started there, buyer representation was just starting to happen, a small number of people. The industry as a whole was kind of taking out pitchforks and trying to chase the buyer's agents out of MLS, chasing them out of the Realtor Association. But now guess what? A lot of people represent buyers. We've seen entry-only listings. We've seen auctions on sites. We've seen virtual office websites. We've seen limited service listings. We've seen a lot of evolution. We've seen an end to the MLS books. Used to be all listings were open listings. No one had an exclusive listing for anything. A seller could sign a bunch of listings with a bunch of different people. First person to they could all put signs in the yard. These are all things that have changed over time. So the reason I'm telling you all this stuff is not just to bore you with history, but just to say, you know what, I know that one of the reasons I've enjoyed working with realtors for such a long time is you're entrepreneurs, you're creative people, you're resilient, you deal with a lot of different kinds of personalities. If you've evolved through just a fraction of those major changes that I've mentioned, even whatever these antitrust lawsuits bring, you've got this. I have confidence in you, and we're here to help you with that. Okay. All right, I want to make sure that we have some time for Anne. I know I might sound a little bit naive about these things, but I truly mean it, that there have been so many changes. If you're new, talk to someone who's been around for a while. Ask them what the changes they've seen, getting through recessions, et cetera. So I'm putting my money on you to continue regardless of how these antitrust suits and the MLS PIN settlement turn out. Okay, got a bunch of questions about lead. I am not trying to skip those questions. I think what I'm going to do is take a bunch of them and put them in a Q&A that will go into our Realtor Digest. And then we'll put that out in the next week, if not sooner. So that's just to give you a quick idea of some of the questions. People are asking about concern about historic properties. You know, how is this going to work with the cost for historic properties? Is there funding available? What kind of resources are available for landlords? You know, what will happen if someone doesn't get this work done in time? Let's see. We also had a question about short-term rentals versus long-term rentals from Sally Hersey, the RIAR president-elect. Sally, I have an answer on the tip of my tongue, but I would feel better just pulling out the law and regulations before I answer that one, because I know a bunch of you are listening and I don't want to take a chance on giving a wrong answer. So I will check that out about short-term rentals versus long-term rentals and the impact of the lead certificate law. Let's see, anything else I can quickly get through here? I think one burning question, yeah, I do want to mention this one. This is from Steve Miller. Steve, for the lead certificate law, how long is the petition period that the tenant can petition to local district court? And which department, if it's not the Department of Health, is tracking that? I think that these are going to be two separate procedures. If the tenant petitions, but basically the tenant would give you notice first saying like, hey, I think there's chipping or peeling paint. If the landlord or property manager or whomever doesn't take care of that, then the tenant can say, okay, well, I'm going to go to court and I'm going to start paying my rent. I'm going to ask the court to let me start paying rent there. That would buy you, I would hope, at least a month, possibly longer. Most tenants, look, let's face it, they don't really want to, it costs money to file something in court. So unless they're being represented by legal services, you know, they can't just pay money to the court. They'd have to actually file a petition. So that'll kind of limit some of the number of people who are doing that. As far as tracking, it would be the district court and then the Department of Health. Once you have the lead certificates, then that would be reported to the Department of Health. And I know I'm rattling off a bunch of these things. Maria asked if I can share the official link for the lead certificate requirement. Yep, I will put that together in a question and answer format, and I'll include links to all of these laws so that no one has to just take my word for it. Final thoughts, and I'm going to turn things, final two thoughts before I turn things over to Anne to close out the program. We have a couple people who posted about waterfront, about vacant land. Raymond has a great tip. fraudulent land sale has happened to me and I've asked for a copy of their driver's license, they immediately end communication. I also find out direct contact information of the owners and contact them. So yes, some people have directly looked up the address on file at the assessor's office and then contacted the person. Let's see. Yep, buyers can pay any compensation as long as the property appraises. And okay, I think with the lead questions, these are all excellent questions. And but just in the interest of time, because I'm already only giving Anne 6 minutes as we are, I'm going to follow up in writing on that. So the article I put together, we can send to the people who've attending the program today. So I know we've rattled off a bunch of information quickly, a lot of substance to the panel. You've had a lot of great questions for us, and you're going to keep me busy for the next few months. I can tell you that much. So on that note, we really thank you for coming. Watch for the recording of this. And let me properly introduce Anne Enos, the Director of Professional Development for the Rhode Island Association of Realtors. And we're also going to keep Anne busy because all the classes that RIAR offers, I'm working with Anne and David's working with Anne to make sure that, if we have classes on landlord-tenant law or lead, we need to update those classes and make sure we mention the new laws. So Anne, you're going to have a lot of work too. Okay, over to you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I enjoy every single minute, but I can't do my job without input from you. So I always end these sessions, which, by the way, they're offered every quarter, and it's based on the relevancy of topical information that you provide to us. That's how these sessions are formulated. So Ann, A-N-N, at rirealtors.org. If you've got a burning question and you would like more information, or if it's for us to find panelists, hopefully your recommendation to participate in these sessions, that's what we're here for. Every quarter, January, April, July, October, typically around the middle of the month. And we've been doing this for years. If you've attended and you find it of value, please go back to your office. Once a video is posted, maybe it would be, a meeting in a box for you to be able to go through these presentations, particularly the Q&A, and it would cause lively debate within your office. So I encourage brokers, supervising brokers, obviously, not to dismiss broker associates, but the responsibility lies at the door of a supervising broker, principal broker, DR, however you want, to kind of reference these people that bear the responsibility. And also to team leaders, you are very involved with the associates that are on your team. So please keep us informed as to what you're interested in, and we'll do our best to make that provision for you. Very quickly, renewal is coming up for the majority of all 10,000 real estate licensees. I would venture to say probably 75, 80%. Your licenses expire April 30th of next year. So again, supervising brokers, you are responsible for making sure that your licensees, your associates, are operating with an active license. And I would be remiss if I didn't inform you that we get a lot of phone calls from sales associates, broker associates that realize they're practicing and their license expired because those folks are on an anniversary date. So it's a lot. But again, that's part of risk that you entertain when you are a managing broker, supervising broker. So my main concern is to put that out there. Please make sure the list of your licenses are up to date and you're not unaware of anyone who could be practicing on an expired license. And it happens, but just a word about that. As far as coursework is concerned, we have an NAR certification program called Right Start. And it's 18 credits, 18 CE. So that's a good thing, right? If you need to renew shortly. but it's split up into 6 sessions. Day 1 is all about business, running a successful business as a real estate licensee, taxes, lead generation, conversations, all of the things that are kind of fundamental to running a real estate business. Day 2, Beverly teaches and does a great job. She's also an ABR instructor, accredited buyer rep instructor. You may want to consider, participating in this program because day 2 is 6 hours that really drills down into buyer representation. Yes, you can take it online. Yes, you can go through NAR's website, but please remember that information is not state specific. It's not MLS specific. Our course is, Bev and I have gone through that national program and have interjected everything that you need to know, whether it's Rhode Island state law or regulation, as well as MLS matrix input and the other programs that Beverly delivers for you. Day 3 is dedicated to the seller side of the business. And we all know that listings are the lifeblood of the industry. So it's a great program. We're offering it in September. I don't have a specific date in mind, but we would love to come behind our brokers, supervising brokers that affiliate. We don't hire, remember. We affiliate because they're independent contractors for the most part, new licensees, but then maybe you don't have the resources to get that new licensees very confident in their skills, but also to very comfortable in the way business should be done. So that's one thing. Thank you. Enormous thanks to Monica too. She's working with the Risk Management Committee. We are in the process of developing an antitrust CE course that will be coming shortly. We're also developing a Rhode Island law course that has all the elements and specifics of all the Rhode Island laws that supersede the Code of Ethics, federal statutes, whatever the case may be. So that's going to be a very robust course because we have a lot of dual licensees. Rhode Island obviously has reciprocal agreements with Massachusetts and Connecticut, but we also have a special agreement, not reciprocal, but a special agreement with the state of Florida. So that Rhode Island law course will benefit, I think, a lot of those folks. Forms. Beverly teaches a great course in Transaction Desk. All of the RIAR forms, MLS forms are located in there and they're up to date, and she will take you through that program, and that's worth credit as well. And last but not least, I would encourage you, if you are considering or currently own a Connecticut license, on August 1st, starting at 8:30 at the Mystic Hilton in Connecticut. We have partnered with Eastern Connecticut Association of Realtors, and we will have a 3 CE course on business across state lines, Rhode Island compared to Connecticut. And you'll walk away with a cheat sheet. It covers licensing, what it's like for a supervising broker if you're going down that pathway in your career to become a supervisor, to have dual licensees in your office and the differentials between the 2 states. We will go into transactional differences. So we've got closing attorneys participating so that you're aware of how Connecticut operates versus Rhode Island. We go into the MLS differentials as well. And then last but not least, all of the Rhode Island and Connecticut forms. So if you are going to practice under a dual license, I think this course will be very beneficial. We've had over 150 people attend in person and via Zoom previous offerings when it comes to Rhode Island and Mass. So now it's Rhode Island, Connecticut, and at some point we are going to do a tri-state. So I know Steve Antoni is in here. I'd like to thank him because he is our lead expert. So he and Monica and myself are going to be updating the lead courses, and then he'll be delivering in Connecticut too. So huge thanks to you, Stephen. So that's it. That's all I've got for now. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope it's been beneficial and a good use of your time. We will be posting the video and the Q&A, all your questions. We'll have the best answers that we can give you. We'll wrap it up with a huge thanks to all our panelists. And as always, Beverly for working in the background. So I hope you have a great Friday and a prosperous and productive weekend. And we'll see you shortly.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I love all these emojis. That way we know you're there instead of just a blank screen. So by the way, I'm going to say one thing. It'll take 10 seconds. I can already, my phone's on Do Not Disturb, but it's already lighting up. Feel free to contact me if you have immediate questions that we didn't get to today. 401-432-6945. 401-432-6945. And thank you very much, everybody. Pam, David, Bev, and everybody. Yay.
Thank you, Monica. You were great as usual.
Everyone was wonderful. Thank you so much.
And our audience too, with all those emojis. I love them. Okay.
I know, isn't that fun?
Bye, have a good day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.